Alright, welcome everyone. This will be your first video assignment for the class. You'll watch the video and then you'll have a short little assignment of 5 questions to answer over it afterwards. So let's get started. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about what is math. Why have you had to take this class since the time you've been in kindergarten? Why have you learned to count? Why have you learned to add, subtract, multiply, or divide? Well, the simple answer is math is all around us. Math is something that it affects our daily lives whether we know it or not, and it helps us kind of move forward. It's in the roads that we drive on, in the schools you're in video games that you're playing at home. It takes a lot of math to be able to make all the electronics work properly and even code the games. So the definition of math in general is it's the study of numbers, patterns, space, and change. Those are the kind of the 4 basic areas that you've really been talking about since you first started with math back at the kindergarten. There's kind of a picture of some of the space representations, and it's also got a pattern there. We could count the tiles, and we could see what happens if we change things out. So, numbers in general. A number is a count or a measure. Is kind of the broad, very specific definition of it. This is probably something you haven't thought about a whole lot. You've learned to count. Back in kindergarten, you learned to count to 100. The 100th day of school was a big deal. So, we haven't really. I'm sure you haven't given a lot of thought to what the number actually means. So, a number, it's a concept or a word of a symbol that represents a specific amount. So, kind of an example of this would be the number 4. If we were back in kindergarten and I had a toy bin and I asked you to go get 4 fire trucks, you would probably walk over there and grab me 4 fire trucks. Same thing if I asked you to put those back up and go get me 4 robots. Again, you're going to get me the exact same amount. Why? Because we know what 4 is. Same thing as if at snack time I say, hey, can you go grab me 4 bananas? Again, we've got 4 bananas. So what are different ways we represent that? Well, probably the first way you learn to represent it is you would count it on your hand, and you would have 1, 2, 3, 4 fingers. You could also do it with dots, X's, really whatever symbol you choose. For most of us, the word we use for that is 4, and that's kind of in general. It's going to be in other languages they have just one word that represents the number 4. And then the symbol we use most regularly is going to be our good old number 4 here. Alright, so that's kind of a quick overview of numbers. Again, just a count or a measure, it means something specific. Right? If I go ask you to get me 4 pencils, 4 pieces of papers, 4 markers, 4 crowns, 4 calculators, whatever, you're always going to come back with that same number. It doesn't matter who I ask, whether I ask you, my 7th or 8th graders, or even a kindergartner. Patterns. Patterns is something, again, that you've probably been dealing with since probably pre-K, kindergarten, learning to recognize them, repeat them, and a lot of things in math are discovered because of patterns. Right? Things follow certain rules. Things in space follow certain rules. Patterns are all around us. And all that means is that they're arranged, things are arranged that follow a rule or rules. And they're kind of everywhere. One of the big patterns we see all the time is a lot of times our floor design. The floor design in the hallway. If you look, they have the same number of white tiles, then they'll put in some colored tiles to kind of represent the red hallway, the blue hallway. There's a pattern to the bricks in the walls. There's a pattern to the carpet in the classrooms. There's a pattern to the ceiling tiles. There's patterns everywhere. So just something to kind of keep in mind. Again, it's something that it's a way nature kind of falls into, and some of the more complex patterns are things we've discovered and learned over time. And then here's an example of a little bit more complex pattern that we could draw. And then finally, the other type of patterns that you'll see and we'll deal a lot with later on this year will be number patterns. And again, it's going to follow rules. So if you take a moment and look at this and you say, okay, I'm going from 2 to 7 to 12 to 17 to 22, what kind of pattern is that going to follow? Okay, so we would kind of go through, and eventually we would sit there and we would go down and figure out and say, well, each time this is going up by 5. So my pattern here, my rule that it follows is it increases by 5 each time. Okay, and it would, if I continued this pattern, these 3 dots means it goes on forever and ever. And if we really wanted to get into deep to this pattern, we could sit there and write this pattern and probably spend the entire school year on it and never be able to finish it. So that's kind of something, a pattern. It's just something that follows a specific rule or rules. All right, our next concept is space. Space is something that we talk about. You've been dealing with it, I can think back at least as far as the 3rd grade, where all it is a space where is the region in which an object exists. So we all exist in space. Our planet Earth exists. In fact, what surrounds our planet Earth is something we call space. And there's a lot of math in the study that goes on with that. So what is space? Our ways we would use it in math, probably what you're used to is 2D figures, which is just a flat figure, and area is one that you've dealt with for the longest time, and you probably started out with area with going through, and you would see a picture like this that I'm drawing here, and then you would go through and count all the squares, and you would say, okay, this is however many square units. This one we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 30 square units is what I would have in the way I drew this. Another way you would see it is the perimeter. And remember, perimeter is going to be measuring how much the distance or space is on the outside. So another way to think about it. Something that you're probably a little bit newer concept is going to be with 3D figures, the kind of figures that are in our everyday life. And you might see things where it's giving you the measure of the height, the width, the depth, and usually we use all those information to find volume. And volume is the amount of space that 3D, or the amount of space that the 3D object takes up. And we measure volume in actually cubes here, and I'm going to try to draw one. I don't know how well it's going to go. And we can see that I would see how many of those little cubes would fit inside that big cube, and that would be my volume, and that's what it's measuring. And we've come up with mathematical formulas to be able to solve that. Another thing that we were going to get into this year is surface area, and that's kind of like perimeter on the outside, but instead we're talking about the flat outsides of the 3D shape. And we can find the area because this is a square here, and we know how to find area of squares. So that's how we use math to find space. The other thing has changed, something else you've been dealing with for a very long time in your time in school, and that is we use 4 basic operations in math that will give us the same outcome every time. So what are our 4 basic operations? Well, you started way back in kindergarten with addition, right? Putting things together, followed up by subtraction, taking things away. Then you got into multiplication, which is adding the same number over and over and over and over again. And then dividing, splitting things into equal groups or subtracting the same number over and over and over again. And those are the kind of 4 basic operations that we're going to use this year. And it's just going to be a combination of these operations that really kind of decide or give us the answers to everything we do, which is why it's important to understand them. I was able to make this using Math is Fun, Microsoft PowerPoint, Epic Pen, and Snagit.